Are you looking to sell your property and the person who wants to buy the property from you is asking you to leave your mortgage in place and they pay the mortgage? Sounds kind of weird, right? But I will get to the point. It is not illegal. Recently, a couple people have been telling me that they've offered their sellers this option, but their sellers think it's illegal. So I'll cut the video short by telling you it is not illegal, but I'm going to go into more detail further in the video. So make sure you watch until the end. If you're new to this channel, I'm Hone and I've been a real estate investor for the last 11 years, and I've been using this strategy over and over so that I can buy properties for my portfolio and sellers can get out of their bad situation. In the investing world, we call this a subject to deal. A subject to just meaning that we are buying the property subject to the existing mortgage. And that just means that you're going to leave the mortgage in place. So the loan will still be in your name, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. The loan's still going to be in your name, but the deed will transfer over to the person buying your property. So you are no longer going to be the owner of the property, but the loan is going to still be in your name. That is 100% completely legal and completely possible, right? Because when you own a property, there's the deed, but then the loan is a separate document, and the different documents can have different names on them. Traditionally, when you sell a house, what happens is, let's say you're trying to sell a property for $100,000 and you have an $80,000 mortgage on the property. The buyer would come with a check for $100,000 plus the closing costs, and that $100,000 will go to the title company. The title company will see that there's an $80,000 mortgage on there, pay off the $80,000 with the $100,000 that the buyer just brought, and give you the difference, the $20,000. How a subject to deal differs is that when the buyer comes to buy the property, we're not paying off the $80,000. So technically, the buyer only needs to bring the $20,000. So that $20,000 plus the existing $80,000 mortgage that's still in your name together equals your purchase price. The title company's job is to give you title insurance, but what's going to happen in this case is they're going to give you title insurance for everything else but the mortgage, because you know that you're buying the property with this lien in place. That lien is not going away until later when you decide to sell the property, refinance the property, or just pay the lien down altogether. So as a reminder and a point of clarity, the deed is transferring, the title company is transferring that deed over to the new buyer, but the loan will still be in the seller's name. Now, in terms of the monthly mortgage payments, that's probably going to be the responsibility of the buyer, but ultimately it is the responsibility of the seller to make sure it's being paid. Because the loan is still in your name, it will still affect your credit if that mortgage payment is not made. But the buyer had said that they were going to pay it. So as long as they're paying you, you can pay the loan, or they might pay it directly because it's a trust game and they may not trust that you're going to pay it. The buyer might give the seller the money, but then the seller goes, well, I'm just going to keep the money. And then the buyer is going to have this property where they paid the monthly mortgage payment and the seller didn't care about their credit going bad, just let it lapse. And then now the bank wants to come after the property because they technically could still foreclose on the property. So this is definitely a game of trust here. The buyer needs to trust that the seller is going to pay the mortgage. If the buyer pays the seller directly, the seller needs to trust that the buyer is going to continue to make payments. So it's a little back and forth. So how do we protect both sides in this case? Well, let's talk about the protecting the buyer. The buyer has the property, right? So they already bought the property. And let's say it's that same example where the property is being sold for $100,000. There's an $80,000 mortgage, and that means there's $20,000 in equity that the seller wants. The buyer brings the $20,000 equity and gives that to the seller via the title company, right? So the buyer's bringing the check to the title company. The title company's cutting a check to the seller. The seller gets the money. Okay, so now the buyer is in for $20,000. The seller has their money. The mortgage is there that needs to be paid. So the buyer makes an arrangement with the seller like, hey, I'm going to send you money. You continue to make the payments. Now, one way to protect the buyer is to gain access to the online accounts for the seller's mortgage. They can check to make sure it's paid. The other option is just to pay it directly. So I've done it in multiple different ways. Some instances I would sign on by having the login information and I would pay it directly. Both I had to log in and the seller had to log in. And we both checked it every single month and saw that it was getting paid. So everybody was happy. Other ways that I've done it is where the seller was on automatic bill pay. And so I would just send the seller the money and then the seller would pay it. And then I would ask for proof that it was paid. So they would send me their bank statement showing that it was paid. So you can approach it multiple different ways like that. It's really based on your feeling, your comfort level. The sellers that I was working with, they cared about their credit. So there's no way that if I were to pay the sellers directly, that they were going to let the mortgage lapse. So I had a certain confidence level that they were going to pay it. So no problem there. But there is always that small chance that the seller won't pay it. Just take the money and run. But again, every single month I verified that the mortgage was being paid, and I was working with sellers who did care about their credit. So if I paid them, they surely were going to pay. Also, again, it was set on automatic bill pay, and the reason I paid them directly is because I didn't want to mess with the automatic bill pay thing. So we just left it alone, and I just made my payments that way. And the way I made my payments, and you guys can choose however you want to make your payments, is I did Venmo or Cash App directly to the seller. Another way that you can make payments to the seller is using a servicing company. You can tell the servicing company that you're going to pay them, and then the servicing company is going to pay the seller. And the reason you want to do that is it kind of protects the seller in a certain way. What happens is, because that loan is still in place, the seller shows it on their credit report. And by it showing on their credit report, their DTI, their debt to income ratio, their DTI is going to report higher. So if they want to do something later, like buy a car on credit or buy another house on credit, then they're going to see this on their DTI, and it's not going to go well for the seller. So what happens when we pay a servicer, the servicer can show a report showing that I, the buyer, have been making the payments to the servicer, and that may prove to the next lender that, hey, though this loan is on the books for the seller, it is being paid by someone else. And so that's why it shouldn't count against them when they're trying to buy a car or a house using credit. Now let's talk about protecting the seller. The seller here has this loan that's still in their name, but they don't own the property anymore. So first thing is, let's talk about the arrangement. I brought the equity check, right? I brought that $20,000 and the seller now has the check, right? So they're not completely out. They just don't own the house anymore, but they got their money up front. So the other thing that I do is I create language in the documents that say, if I, the buyer, don't make the mortgage payments, that the seller has the right to get the property back, right? Talk to your attorneys. I am not an attorney. Talk to your attorney about how to set that up, but make it so that if you as the buyer do not meet your obligations, your responsibilities, which is to pay the mortgage every single month, there's a little period to cure, right? Meaning make good on, right? There's a little period to cure, but if you don't make that monthly mortgage payment, that the seller gets back the house. And what happens is they get back the house that's worth the $100,000. They get back the house that's worth $100,000. They keep the $20,000, and any repairs that you did to the property, hey, that was a gift to them, being that you didn't meet your end of the bargain, which was to pay the monthly mortgage payment. Before we go too far into it, let's recap what I just talked about. So we have a buyer, we have a seller, and the buyer is bringing a check for just the equity piece that the seller was going to receive. In our example, it was a $100,000 deal with $20,000 equity and $80,000 mortgage. We're going to leave the $80,000 mortgage loan in place in the seller's name, meaning we're not going to do anything. We're not even going to tell the bank about this because the banks don't like this, and I'm going to explain to you what that means later. So we're going to leave that in place. We're going to leave the loan in place, the $80,000. The buyer is going to bring the equity check, the $20,000, and then pay for their side of closing costs, and the seller is going to pay their side of closing costs, and however you guys negotiate that. So now the deed went from the seller to the buyer, and the loan stayed in the seller's name. So the buyer has the property, the seller just has the loan. Then we maybe set up a servicing company in between, where the buyer, when they make the payments, they make it to the servicing company makes it to the mortgage company, right? And that shows that the seller no longer is paying for that debt, right? So that's proof. The other way I've done it, and maybe this works for you guys, maybe it doesn't, but I've literally written a note and signed it and said that I am making payments to the mortgage company, and the next mortgage company that the seller was dealing with, when they wanted to buy the next house, it worked. That letter was proof enough that in that DTI, that debt shouldn't count against them when they were trying to buy the next house. So that worked out, right? And I think I might have said that when you're using a service company, you're going to have the buyer pay the servicing company and then the servicing company pay the seller. That's one way. The other way is you work with the servicing company and then the servicing company pays the mortgage company directly, right? So multiple ways to do it. So if you're watching this video and you're like, hey, he just said something else earlier on, it's because you have multiple options. But let's keep on going. Let's talk about where we are. So now the buyer owns the property. The deed is in the buyer's name. The seller no longer owns the property, but the loan is still in their name. The buyer is making payments to either the seller, to the servicing company, or to the mortgage company directly, one of all those different ways. Sometimes the buyer and seller can both log into the loan portal online to check the status, or sometimes the seller sends a text message to the buyer. All of these scenarios work, right? You guys figure out whatever works for you guys. Once the buyer now owns the property, they're going to begin doing whatever their plan was, their business plan for making money from this property, because it's an investment property for them. So the buyer is going to either fix up the property to flip it or fix it up to rent it out. Whatever the case, that's their business plan. They're going to be sinking money into the deal, and if the buyer doesn't make the payments, then hopefully you guys have an arrangement where the seller's just going to get the property back, and then the seller can go resell it again with all of this extra money in their pocket. So that's the arrangement that I think works for most people, actually. Where it doesn't work is when the seller gets all scared because they think that this strategy is illegal, which is what prompted this whole entire video of me explaining to you guys what this is all about. So let's go into that part. Is this legal? And like I said in the beginning of the video, yes, it is. It is absolutely legal to do. Now, does the bank like it? And the answer is no, because you've transferred the deed. And that is actually an action that allows the bank to call the note due if they want. Meaning, hey, I see that you've transferred the property over to Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, right? I see that you transferred the deed over. We would like to get paid off in full. So that's called the due on sale clause, right? Due on sale. So the due on sale clause means that they're calling the note due because you sold the property, essentially. And so now what do we do if that happens? Well, the buyer has to come up with a plan to pay off that loan. So what can the buyer do to pay off the loan? Well, like I said before, they can either sell the property, refinance the property, or just pay it off to zero. And how do you pay it off to zero? Well, maybe the buyer had cash or lines of credit or credit cards. If you watch my other videos, I talk about all of these different ways that you can have money on the side just ready to deploy into your deals. You may not want to use them just yet because of different reasons, because maybe the seller is willing to do subject to. So why not take advantage of the seller's low interest rate mortgage now and not deploy your cash or your lines of credit or those kind of things? But you have them in reserve. Like the buyer has the lines of credit, cash, credit cards, private money lenders, whoever, to pay off that mortgage if the mortgage company calls the loan due. Or the buyer can sell the property. Maybe that was in the business plan. Maybe they're buying the property, they're going to fix it up, and then they're going to sell it. And when they sell it, you have to pay off all the liens. And so the first position mortgage, which is the seller's mortgage company, they're going to get paid off first once the property's sold. Or maybe the buyer bought the property to rent it out. So now the exit strategy is to refinance the property. So they're going to go out, they're going to find a lender, whether it's a bank or a credit union or a hedge fund or whatever, right? They're going to find somebody else to replace the existing debt. So what I like doing is I will go out, I will find a lender, and I say, hey, I bought this property, I fixed it up, now it's worth $200,000. Will you give me a loan on the property? And then the lender will say, absolutely, Hone. They do an appraisal. The appraisal comes back at $200,000 because I put all this money into fixing it all up. They say, based on your appraisal of $200,000, we are willing to lend you $150,000. Okay, great. So then the $150,000 travels through the title company, and then the title company takes that $150,000 and pays off the first position mortgage, which is the $80,000 that's in the seller's name. And then the remaining money, the other $70,000, $80,000 150 minus $80,000 equals 70,000. That $70,000 goes back to the buyer, right? Minus closing costs and transfer taxes and all those kind of things, right? But whatever remains goes back to the buyer. And the buyer has to just reimburse themselves because remember, they put money into the property. They gave the seller $20,000. Where did all that money come from? Well, maybe it came from a line of credit or credit card. So the buyer's going to get that $70,000 check and then reimburse him or herself for all of the money they put out for the deal. So that's another way that you can pay off the loan. The due on sale clause, though it exists, says that the mortgage company may call the loan due. May is the key word. As many times as I've done it, and as many times as all of my investor friends have done it, I have yet to hear of a company calling the loan due. And even if they did call the loan due, depending on your state, it could take a really, really long time for the mortgage company to actually foreclose on the property. I'm sure if you just get on the phone with the company and say, hey, this is what's happening, we're going to make the payment, we need more time, we need this, we need that, they'll work with you because foreclosing on a property cost a lot of money and time as well. So they don't necessarily want to go through that. They just want their money. So if you create a plan with them, I believe, and this is just my opinion, I believe that they're going to be willing to work with you and they're going to be willing to give you more time, which allows you to either fix up the property to sell or fix up the property to rent out, or for you to go out, get your lines of credit, get your cash, get your private lenders to replace that first position loan, that mortgage. So is this strategy illegal? Absolutely not. Is this a little outside of the box? Yes, if you are not in the investing world. This strategy is done all day, every day, all over the place. It's a very popular strategy, and because of YouTube videos like this, it is getting more and more popular. So though you may not have ever heard of it, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, and it doesn't mean it's illegal. It's just something different. It's outside of the box. And for some sellers, this works great. And let's talk about that actually. Let's go into that. Why in the world would anybody sell their property in this fashion? Well, there's a bunch of reasons. I'm not going to number the reasons. I'm just going to give it to you guys the way I explain it to the sellers that I actually work with. When I buy properties, sellers like working with me because I make the process extremely easy. And in return, I say, hey, seller, I need you to work with me a little bit as well. So when it comes to selling a property, what sellers need to deal with are selling properties with an agent who wants their commission. And then their property and all of the insides and all of your belongings and all that kind of stuff, that gets put on the MLS, that's multiple listing service, the MLS on public for everybody to see. And maybe you as a seller, you don't want people looking into your property, right? 3, you're gonna have a bunch of people walking to your property and you may not want that. Even though you're selling the property, you're going to be out of there. You still may not care for all these people to walk through your property while you still own the property. Because mind you, you might still live there and you don't want people going through your house while you live there, right? So that's another kind of like terrible thing that sellers have to deal with. The next one is that the seller is maybe needing to sell their property to buy the next property. And sometimes that doesn't link up. That doesn't sync up, I should say. Sync up, right? The seller can't find the next property and they don't know when they're going to find it, right? So for all of these reasons, and there are many more, right? I come in there and I say a couple of things to make it super easy. So when I'm in there, I tell the seller that I am buying the property directly so that we don't need to deal with licensed agent who wants a commission. It is from you to me and there is no other fees made up. Right? The only fee that the seller's going to have to pay is the normal fee that they would always have to pay, which are their closing costs, right? And pay off any kind of liens and judgments and anything else that might come up on title. But outside of that, there's no additional fee like a real estate agent commission. The other thing is you're not going to have to publicly post your property. You're not going to have the world be able to see your property and the insides of it, right? Which also means that nobody else is going to be walking through your property. I've walked through your property already. I like it. Here's my number, but here are my terms. So I'm going to be buying your property with without having the world see your property as well. So nobody else walks to your property. Here's a big one that I didn't mention. The people who might be walking through your property and making offers on your property, they're going to say, hey, I'm going to get a home inspection. The home inspector walks through, finds all of these things wrong with the property because every property has problems, and a home inspector's job is to find these problems. Even if they're tiny, teeny, tiny problems, the home inspector needs to create a big fat report because that's their job. Right? Because imagine you hired a home inspector to inspect the house and they come back and go, I didn't find anything. You would feel kind of funny. So a home inspector will always find something, no matter how small, and put it in the report. And the report's going to be this fat. And then the home buyer, the potential home buyer, is going to come back to the seller and say, hey, seller, I got this big fat report from the inspector and I want you to fix all of these things, right? And so they're going to nitpick a seller to death, and a seller just doesn't want to deal with it. They don't want to give the credit. They don't want to get the things fixed. It's a nightmare. When I'm buying it, we're avoiding the commissions. We're avoiding the house being publicly displayed. We're avoiding all of these people walking through the property. We're avoiding having the seller have to fix anything, because when I'm buying the property, I'm buying as is, right? Which is a big deal for a lot of sellers. The sellers know that their house is lived in, that their house needs work, that there are skeletons in the closet. And if I can come in and go, look, I've bought dozens of these things. It's okay. I'll deal with all of the problems that it comes with because I know how and I have the team to do so. The seller's like, oh, wow, really? Yeah, this is what I do. I'm a professional. This is my job. This is what I do. I buy properties and I try to make it easy for sellers because I want the sellers to win too. I want the seller, me and the seller, to both have a win-win scenario. The other big thing, let's say that the seller can't find the next place to move into. I've done this one. I say, hey seller, look, after you sell me the property, you can stay. And you can stay in your current property until you find your next property. And this way, if you sold me the property early, you don't have to move into an Airbnb or a hotel, which is going to charge you an arm and a leg. You get to stay at your property and all of your stuff gets to stay here too until you're ready to move out. So all your stuff doesn't have to go into storage, which is another fee you're going to have to pay for. So you avoid super high storage costs, super high Airbnb or hotel costs, right? You avoid those two things. So that's an amazing thing, right? That's an amazing thing. When the seller hears about all of these benefits that come with working to me, their eyes light up and they go, wow, this is exactly what I was looking for. A hassle-free process when it comes to selling my property. It's kind of like when you trade in a car, right? When you buy a new car and you go to the dealership and you want to trade in your car, the dealership's going to look at the car, no matter what's wrong with it, they're going to give you an offer. They're going to give you a price. Be like, yeah, I'll just buy it. Okay, no problem. And you as the seller of the car, you're going to be like, wow, that's so much better than putting it on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist or whatever else people are using these days to sell cars, right? You don't want people driving your car around and checking it out and kicking the tires and all that kind of stuff. This dealership is going to be like, hey, give me the car, no problem. I want you to buy the next one. So for me, I try to make it that hassle-free. Hey guys, look, I don't care what's wrong with the property. I'm going to make you an offer and we're going to figure out a win-win solution. Plus, you're going to save money on not having to pay an Airbnb, storage, hotel, and real estate agent commission. You're also not going to have to pay for any repairs. How hassle-free is that? Pretty cool, right? And so the seller really likes that. So then what happens is I say, look, seller, I'm willing to give you this number and I'm willing to buy it with all of these benefits. Everything that we just mentioned. I just need you to do me one thing. And they go, Hone, what's that? What's that? I say, well, you have that mortgage, that $80,000 mortgage. And I see that you make $500 a month payments to the bank, right? That's your monthly mortgage payment, $500 a month, $80,000 loan. They're like, yep. I'm like, do me this favor. What I like to do is I buy these properties, I fix them up, and then I refinance with the bank in a few months, maybe a year, right? All I need you to do is leave that loan in place. Leave that in place. I'll make the payments on your behalf. The loan is not switching out of your name. The loan's still going to be in your name, but I'm going to make the payments. And the $20,000 that you were going to get when you sold your house, you're still going to get that. So nothing changes. Okay? Nothing changes in terms of money going into your pocket, and nothing changes in terms of money coming out of your pocket if you were to sell your house, because now you're no longer making the $500 a month mortgage payments and you put $20,000 in your pocket. The reason that nothing changes is because I'm going to make the $500 a month now, and that $20,000 is still going into your pocket because I'm going to bring that at closing. So this is a scenario where it's a win-win for both of us. I make it hassle-free for the seller, and the seller is making my life easier because I don't have to go out and raise $80,000 to go buy this property. At this point, I've done so many of these things that I don't even use an attorney anymore, but as always, if you're doing contracts, documentation, all that kind of stuff, have a lawyer do it, but make sure that you deal with a lawyer that understands this, because there are professionals out there who, though they are a professional, doesn't mean that they know everything. That's like going to a pediatrician and trying to get brain surgery, right? Just because your uncle is an attorney doesn't mean your uncle specializes in real estate. Make sure you find the right professional to help you who understands the risk as well as the benefits of this arrangement. Lawyers typically try to chop everything down and say no deal, right? Their job is to like keep you safe. But sometimes they keep you so safe that nothing happens and then you get hurt in the long run. What could happen for a seller if they don't say yes to this deal is that the property sits on the market, sits, takes price cut after price cut after price cut, and then even after they take all these price cuts and they finally land on a sale price, let's say it's $90,000, not $100,000, they still have to pay the commission to the real estate agent. So they lose all this money, and then the buyer says, hey, I have the inspection report. I want you to fix everything. Oh my gosh. Then the seller goes, man, I should have just went with Hone. I should have just did the subject to deal. It would have been nice. I would have had my 20 grand. I would have been on my way. I would have had my mortgage paid and all would have been good in the world. But lawyers who don't know what they're doing might try to shoot it down because they're going to say like, oh, that's impossible. That doesn't work. That's not allowed. When in reality, they just don't know because they've never heard about it, right? Again, when it comes to like normal everyday people who are not in the investing space, never heard of it. Sounds weird. Must be illegal. Is that true? Of course not. But if you're around the investor space and you talk to investors about subject to, they're going to be like, oh yeah, I did 10 of them the other week, right? It's that kind of thing. If you don't know, you don't know. So this is a video dedicated to helping you know more about subject to deals. All right, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. What prompted this call was one of my students made an offer to an agent, and the agent thought that this was illegal because the agent had never heard about it before, and they said that they were going to do more research. I just wanted more information to be out in the world, and so that agents, attorneys, sellers, and buyers can all know that this is not illegal, that this happens all day, every day. But without people like me creating videos like this with content like this, then how do you know, right? How do you know otherwise? So hopefully you guys found this video great. I also don't have a script in front of me. I was like, you know what? I need to create a video on this since this is something I do day in and day out. So this wasn't scripted. This was just me ranting straight from the heart, straight from the gut, and hoping that it's landing for you guys watching and that you guys are able to take this information and go do something really great with it. This is definitely one of those videos that you want to share with other people so that this information gets out there. Also, leave in the comments below, what did you learn? What are you going to implement? And did you realize that this was legal and not illegal? Are you one of the people who thought that this was an illegal strategy? Finally, if you haven't done so already, go to my website, honezone.com, where I have a free training available. Simply enter your name and your email, and you will get emailed every single day another snippet of my training that I am providing to you guys who are trying to become real estate investors and who are trying to multiply the assets that they own. With that, guys, thank you guys so much for watching. I'm Hone Tai. Let's multiply.